I think the whole organization like of your videos, you go step by step. It makes you confident, and during the right intervals, we have the that we write the essays and you correct it. That is so important.
You are now listening to the IELTS podcast. Learn from tutors and ex-examiners who are masters of IELTS preparation. Your host, Ben Worthington.
IELTS Academic Task 1. How to describe a line graph. Hello there, IELTS podcast listeners. In this tutorial, we are going to briefly look at how to describe a line graph or a line chart. And we're going to, basically, it's going to be like an overview, a very practical strategy. And I think the best way to use this tutorial is to, one, grab a pen or a pencil and just make notes. And because there's a lot of value coming up, I would probably, after you've listened to the whole tutorial, probably circle one piece of advice that you think you can implement today, and then just implement that. Try it in the next three pieces of the next three writings that you do, and if there's another area that you're not so sure of, choose that, master it, implement it, and then go back to your list. And this way you don't get overwhelmed. You can just master one part, implement it, get some feedback on it, because we all know that's the fastest way to improve. And then go back to your list and work through it and do the same with the next piece of advice. Right, before we jump into this, I just want to give you a brief overview of who I am. My name is Ben Worthington. As you probably know, I'm from England, from the north, and I got into IELTS because I was teaching English in Spain, and a lot of students were coming up to me and saying, like, look, I need some help with the IELTS exam. And at the time, I was one of these teachers who could do a little bit of everything, and I did it well. You know, I could teach kids. So exhausting, especially Spanish kids. I could teach adults. It was slower, but it was rewarding because they were motivated. I could teach students, which was extremely motivating. I could teach teenagers, but I had to sell the class a lot. I had to get them really pumped up. You know, I could do all of those, and I could do it okay. I could do it good. But the problem was two things. One, I like working with results. I want to see the progression, and I want it to be measured, you know, and teaching an adult student such as Eduardo every Friday afternoon, there was no way to really measure it. I couldn't really force him to go and take a test and say, oh, look, you've improved with me. So I quickly focused on IELTS, and I became much more competent in teaching IELTS. And how did I get more competent? Well, I started interviewing all the experts around that I could find, recording the interviews, putting them on IELTSPodcast.com. Some of the advice they gave worked, and I put that into the Jump to Band 7 or It's Free online writing course. Some of it didn't work, so I just rejected it after testing it out with my students. And this is how IELTS Podcast came around, and since then we've developed the online course. We offer feedback for students, and we've got that very popular newsletter where you can go and sign up. Go to IELTSPodcast.com and you'll see a link there where you can sign up, and once you're on that email list, we send you special offers. We send you lots of advice for writing, lots of tips, and it's a reasonable way to improve. I'm not going to say it's exceptional, because the exceptional way to improve, the fastest way to improve, as we all know, is to get feedback. And this is another area that we decided to specialize in, because as you know, we like getting results for our students, and the fastest way to get results is with the feedback. Not only are we going to tell you the grammar mistakes, vocabulary mistakes, what you did well, what needs improving, what you need to keep, but we can also give you that little bit of motivation, which we know is insanely valuable. It's so overlooked, the motivational side. So if you want some feedback, if you want to improve, then go to IELTSPodcast.com and you'll see there that there's a very valuable service. It's inexpensive, especially if you compare it to the cost of failing another exam, and not just the cost, not just the monetary cost, the time cost, the emotional cost, the motivational cost. There's so much more into it. So that's why it's a good idea just to get the solid preparation, get some feedback. Even if it's just a week before your exam, it's the fastest way to improve. You'll see maybe some glaring errors and you can correct them, go into your exam much more confident. Right, let's jump into it. How to describe a line graph. So we're going to look at a basic strategy. It's very straightforward. I'm going to give you some tips, very practical. And this is like an overview, a crash course in the online course about academic task 1 that we've got on the course. We'll go into it in much more detail, but this is just a very brief, practical, straightforward overview. We're going to look at what to do on exam day, how to group the information. We're going to look at the introduction, we're going to look at the summary, and then I'm going to give you 5 pieces of advice. I don't like using the word tips, but 5 pieces of advice relating to the language you can use. So what you need to know the difference between the active and the passive voice. We're going to go into this in more detail in a minute. We're going to look at adverbs, verbs, nouns, phrases for the introduction, phrases for summaries, and phrases for describing change. Let's go over that again. Active, passive voice, adverbs, verbs, nouns, phrases for the introduction, phrases for summaries, phrases for change. In general, I have a mixed feeling towards phrases. They're kind of like crutches, those metal things that you use when you've broken your leg and you can walk. But obviously you don't want to rely on these crutches for the rest of your life. But they do get you to point A to point B much faster than waiting for the leg to heal. So they are useful. Obviously, long term, you want to learn the underlying structures, but these are a quick, practical fix, especially if you've got your exam coming up in a week. Let's move. So group the information. This is essential, and I know so many students struggle with this. We've got a whole module on this and strategies where we go into it in much more detail. When we're grouping the information, we're just looking for patterns and exceptions and maximums and minimums. So maybe we could group one piece of information by making a paragraph about the maximums and the minimums. Another group of information could be the overall trend. Another group of information could be the exceptions. One's maybe trends that just do not follow the overall line. Now, when we're grouping the information, as I said, this is going to give us an overview as to what we're going to include in the graph. Now, a common basic mistake is to include every information point, and this goes against the marking criteria, because if we look at band 7, it says effectively grouping the information. So this is a skill we need to master, and I don't think it's a too difficult skill to master. The reason is because all you need to do is, as I said, is follow those 3 patterns: the maximums, the minimums, the overall trends, the exceptions, but also just develop this skill. It's not a language skill, which is kind of funny. It's not required to speak English. I mean, of course, if you're going to take in the academic route, it's going to be useful later, but in itself, it's not a language skill. It's like a graph interpretation skill. So I think this is why even native speakers can struggle with the IELTS exam, because they're like, hey, I speak English perfectly, but it might take them way too long to actually interpret a graph, to interpret visual information. And one of the ways to get competent at this is to do it over and over again. Another way is to just work through the online course, and we share even more shortcuts. So when you are planning the report, this is the first step you want to take. You want to group the information. So you see your exam chart in front of you. The first step is to group it into those categories that I mentioned a few seconds ago. Now, then you're going to go into your introduction. The introduction, you can state the overall idea of what's happening. Now, it's important to get this done at the very beginning, just in case you run out of time. So we put it at the beginning, and we can say something like, from the line graph, it is clear that the majority of UK supermarkets saw sales grow over the 10-year period. For example, if we have a chart about UK supermarkets, but we're kind of paraphrasing the title of the chart, and we're adding a little bit of information. We're not giving the whole story away. We won't go into the exceptions, maybe the supermarkets that didn't grow in the chart, or the month where the rainfall was the least. However, we're just going to give it an overall picture. Okay, and we're going to repeat this again later in the summary, just as a clear indication of the finish of that we are ending our academic task 1 writing. The summary, as I just said, we're going to say the same, possibly a little bit more detailed, but definitely in a different language, okay, in a different construction. So this is why we've got to really boost our vocabulary. We've got to get a clear idea of synonyms. So for example, perhaps in the introduction, we're going to say, overall, it is clear that, and then slightly more detailed description. And then at the end, what we can say is, in summary, from the chart, 4 out of 5 of the supermarkets grew. However, Co-op undoubtedly performed the worst out amongst the 5, okay, amongst the 6. So a good range of vocabulary is essential. So let me just give you an overview of the process. Step 1, we identify the information, we group it, and we build we plan body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2. It's a plan. We're not going to write out full sentences. 2 useful tips here. Circle and illustrating the chart in front of you, especially if you're practicing at home. Circle it and it's like, okay, this circle of information is going to be the information that I communicate in body paragraph 1. And then I'm going to draw another circle, and I might put some loops or some stars around the exceptions or the overall trend. I'm basically getting clear in my mind what's going in body paragraph 1 and body paragraph 2. Step 2, we're going to write the introduction. It's going to be a brief overview. Then we're going to write our body paragraphs. Okay? And in these body paragraphs, we're going to follow the plan that we just wrote a few seconds beforehand. Then we're going to do the summary. Summary is going to be similar to the introduction, slightly more detailed and different language. Now, as a side note, your opinion is not necessary. If you know the reason for the change, but it's not on the graph, don't mention it. We do not need your opinion. I've seen this so many times when I'm correcting essays. A student will say, the reason for the fall in rainfall is obviously due to the summer months. We don't really need that. We're only going to move or translate the information from a visual image into language. That's our main goal. Second tip. Check your writing to make sure that the subject and the verb agree. This is insanely important. Also, pay attention to the tenses. Pro tip, avoid terrible basic vocabulary, big, small, good, whatever. I've been through this before. I don't need to go into it. It's just lower level vocabulary. Ideally, we're aiming for a 7 or above. We need to leave these this basic vocabulary in the basic introductions to the English language books where we found them. We leave it there. We're higher, we're better than big, small, good, bad, do, be. All right, we've got a much more powerful vocabulary, and I've got a full list of synonyms that we can use to boost the score in the online course. As I said before, we don't need a topic sentence. We do need an introduction. We do need to get competent with paraphrasing, and also avoid using in the summary. It's not a conclusion, so we are definitely not going to use conclude. Conclude is the definition of a conclusion is what you have reasoned after listening to different arguments. It's like the final thought in your thinking process. As we all know, academic task 1 is purely objective. There's no arguments, there is no reasoning, there's no discussion. It's a description. So we do not use to conclude. We can use overall at the beginning, and we can use in summary at the end. In summary, or to summarize the chat, in summary, all supermarkets performed well except for the Co-op, for example. Now then, let's have a look at the different grammatical skills you'll need to learn. Active to passive. I'm not a massive fan of the passive voice. It evokes a sense of we don't know who is doing what to whom, and therefore it can be a little bit unclear. However, this is IELTS. It's a different language task. It's a different language requirement. We're not entirely producing an objective view. We are also showing the examiner our linguistic ability. So therefore the passive is necessary. In the criteria we have a grammatical range and accuracy. Range is the depth or the broadness of our language ability. So we're going to use the active and the passive. Brief description. Sales crashed to new levels. In this case, we would change it to there was a crash to new levels in sales. Next example, the sales rose quickly. There was a quick rise in the sales. Employment fell drastically. There was a drastic fall in employment. If you're not entirely comfortable with transforming the active to passive or passive to active, I have done this in another language when I was learning Spanish. What worked for me personally was just doing translation lists after translation lists and getting feedback, of course. But if I could just find an entire list of passive sentences in Spanish, and then I could translate them into the active voice, also in Spanish, back and forth, and in your case you would be doing it in English, back and forth, and the translating as well. And trust me, a full day of doing this and then repeat it a few more times, it quickly becomes a skill and it becomes in bed. Likewise, as well, we want to get competent with transforming the passive to active. So if we see, if we've written, there was an incredible decrease in output, perhaps we use that structure in the introduction. For the summary at the end, we could say it was clear the output decreased incredibly over the 6-month period. Next, adverbs. Adverbs are insanely useful, again, because we are boosting our grammatical range. So instead of saying it is clear the trend is downward, we can say clearly the trend is downward. Again, it is evident that sales dropped in the first quarter. Quite a sophisticated sentence. Maybe we want to repeat something similar for another variable. We could say, evidently, sales in the first quarter dropped significantly for the Co-op supermarket. And having this range, having this dexterity in the language is going to help you boost your grammatical range and accuracy score and your lexical resource score sufficiently. Okay. Just one word of warning though. We've got a sentence here in front of me. It says, "It is surprising that sales rose after a steady decline." What's wrong with this? Just use it with caution, because surprisingly, our opinion is starting to creep in. Okay? In some cases, it's not entirely necessary. In other cases, it could be necessary. But use it with caution, and if you're unsure, just stay away. Okay? Surprisingly infers that our opinion, that we were surprised, and we're not really. We're going down a different route there. It starts to become more subjective, and as I said before, it should be an objective overview, an objective interpretation of the data in front of us. Our opinion is not necessary. Two more things. Time expressions. Now, to get your time expressions on point, to get them perfect, what's really helpful is a good grasp of the tenses and the tenses we are going to be using. Now, we're going to be using a lot of dynamic vocabulary. In some cases, we can use the present continuous. In some cases, we can use the past. Tenses is a big... Ooh, did you hear that? I was using basic vocabulary. Time expressions and tenses are a major important part of your exam, especially for academic task 1. So much so, we've got a whole module about it. But here are some phrases that you can use. You can say, over the period from 1999 to 2020, there was a large expansion of credit in the US market, for example. Another useful phrase, over a 5-year period, sales dropped significantly for the Co-op supermarket. Throughout the 1990s, rainfall progressively dropped throughout every single quarter. Again, these phrases are very valuable. These are kind of like your crutches. If you're not entirely comfortable with the English language, learning some time expressions like this can help you significantly for academic task 1. And now, to bridge these time expressions, what's very useful is "and then" or "after that." And this shows a little bit of sequencing, which helps you with your cohesion and coherence. Now, some useful verbs to describe a dynamic chart. Now, for some reason, these always come up, even when a student might be describing a pie chart or a bar chart, and they're not always appropriate. So use these when we have a line chart. Plunge, stabilize, rocket, crash, remain stable, soar, tumble, remain constant, surge, sink, level off, leap, fall, drop, fluctuate, decline. They are very useful, and we can also, once we've got a good grasp of the English language, we can change them into adverbs and whatnot. A word of caution though, I often see like an overuse of adjectives. For example, a student might write, there was a huge surge in demand in the first quarter. It's not too bad, but surge already implies a massive increase. So it kind of makes the huge surge, the huge part, redundant. Likewise with rocket. Yeah, sales rocketed in the first quarter is quite strong already. So we don't need to amplify it in any way. Just bear that in mind. Now, phrases to use for the introduction. We can say, from the graph, it is clear there was a huge increase in sales, or we could say sales rocketed between the first part of the decade and the last part. Okay, not the best sentence, but from the graph it is clear. That's what we want to put. Another one, as can be seen from the line graph, as is shown by the chart, as is illustrated by the line chart. Now, these are useful because when we're starting off each paragraph, we can sometimes struggle. And what I found in the past is that we could be struggling to get started. So just using these phrases gets the first part of the momentum. You get moving. And then once you get moving, you can pick up some momentum and you will find that it can easily flow. So if you stumble, if you struggle at starting your paragraph, these phrases are a great way to get the ball rolling. Because as we know with language, especially with speaking, a lot of students struggle with mind goes blank. But if you can just, and it's like a heavy ball that you're just pushing and it's not moving. But once you make that once you push it and you get those first few centimeters of movement, then you can start picking up momentum and the next push is going to be easier. And we all know when we're speaking or when we're writing, the same can happen. So these phrases, although they might seem a little bit simple, a little bit basic, they are definitely valuable in getting you moving in the right direction. Right, that's everything from me today. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you want more detailed and more practical help, then go to IELTSPodcast.com. Remember to sign up for the newsletter and also have a look at the feedback service. We are getting some amazing results, and every 2 weeks we have a student on who shares how they succeeded, and a lot of the time these success stories, it all starts with getting feedback. It all starts with taking the first step to improving their work in a quick manner and getting the motivation, getting the information that's holding them back, rectifying their mistakes and starting on this improvement process. My name is Ben Worthington. Thank you very much for listening. Hopefully I'll see your essay soon and we can give you some feedback and help you progress to band 7, 8 or 9, or even if you're stuck at 5.5, we'd love to, and you're aiming for a 6, 6.5 or whatever, we can get you there. Thank you very much for listening and have a great day and good luck with your IELTS exam.
Thanks for listening to IELTSPodcast.com.
Almost half of the essay was with the structure,
Wow.
exact structures you have provided, but with my own ideas, of course.
Absolutely, yeah.
The result was 7.
Wow, wonderful. Well done there, Olga. Well done.